The title of the Dharma talk this morning is Chemtrails, and you may have heard rumors about that. And I just, that title came up because there's so much confusion around it, and there's conspiracy theories. You can read all about that or on Wikipedia, Wiki whatever, and other YouTube and so on. The idea basically is that some of the stuff going through the sky and leaving trails are not contrails or condensation trails from aircraft, but are deliberately being sprayed there by who knows who, NASA or somebody, to shield the Earth from the sun and to, I guess, one of the speculations is counteract global warming and so on. And there's controversy about it. You know, there are people who have, if you listen to some of the people who say that this is true, they sound pretty convincing, but I don't know. I'm not here to particularly talk about that or promote one thing or another. What I am here to promote is train your mind. I say that so many times that I'm beginning to wonder if it isn't just one word instead of three. So the idea here is don't take your awareness away from anything that's being promoted in the news, on any of the wiki accesses to knowledge, but also train your mind so that your own chemtrails, your own delusion, or your own blockages. The interesting thing about a blockage is you don't know what's there. That's why they call it a blockage. Usually someone else has to tell you you're blocked in some area. And then what do we do with it? We do one of three things, you'll notice, or nuances between. We either believe that, or we disbelieve it, or we ignore the whole thing. Just dismiss it or distract ourselves from it without accepting or rejecting. So it seems to be very complicated. If it weren't so complicated, we could actually look at a situation and there would be, 100% evidence there that nobody could contradict. But that situation only happens once in a while and in very limited areas. Usually it's extremely complicated. The whole political system, I'm not here to give a talk on politics. That would be painful for all of us. But you'll notice in that area that there is a deliberate, it looks like, I don't believe this or disbelieve it, but it looks like there's a deliberate stirring up of all kinds of smoke or all kinds of smog and fog. That's smog, isn't it? There's all kinds of political stuff where I think there's a deliberate deception going on in so many different ways that it just makes it confusing, because then you have the people who believe that, the people who disbelieve it, and it becomes a web or a network or a lattice of just opinions and ideas and causes and conditions and finger pointing and so on. So what I'm basically saying is it's so important for you. If you're in this room, then you probably have an interest in this. That probably means something to you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. So I would say, give this the benefit of the doubt. Train your mind. And how do we talk about doing that here? We don't try to necessarily to get our mind to do something else. So I think I just gave a talk about don't calm the mind or something like that, which is kind of the opposite of what everybody else is saying about mind training. Calm the mind. And I think that's a little too early to calm something you don't understand. That's why I'm saying that. But first, let's see what it is. Let's see as much as we can what is actually happening. And this is the same thing with using this whole idea of chemtrails as chemical seeding of the atmosphere to somehow control the weather and so on. And apparently there's also what's called conspiracy theories about that NASA and other nations are actually doing things in the atmosphere to trying to control weather. And then they're talking about, what is that called? Weaponizing the weather. We don't have much hope if that's happening, as if we had any. So not to go into that so much, other than use that as a metaphor, an example for how difficult it is, because they're just opinion. We even increase the whole idea of opinions and ideas by saying, "What do you believe?" Well, a belief is something that you don't know for sure. You can't, because otherwise it's a fact. If it's a fact, you can't. When it's water is wet, you don't say to somebody, "Do you think you believe water is wet?" Does everybody believe water is wet? Or do you know it's wet? To believe something, like do you believe it's going to rain? You might go there. You'll notice that meteorologists with that fancy scientific name is just a fancy job for guesswork. They can't predict. They can't say this will happen. Sometimes because the causes and conditions that arise in the atmosphere and so on are still way too complicated to actually track with our sophisticated devices to understand the weather. So we don't know for sure. We're getting better at it. It looks like if you look at your cell phone and what's the temperature going to be next Tuesday, usually it's pretty close, but not always. And meteorologists do not apologize when they're wrong. So the idea that by saying chemtrails of the mind, I'm just saying, let's look at your mind. Use this kind of an environment, this structure that goes back 2,500 years, the tradition does, to actually create a space, a place, a dynamic, a mode, a form to help you work with the mind. The mind is it's like your thought patterns it's like having a head full of butterflies, or bees, or something that's lots of things that are all moving different directions, and there doesn't seem to be any organization at all. What happens is to believe something gives us more of the feeling that something is organized. But it isn't necessarily the truth. It just is our subjectivity of things that, well, I believe this. Well, what's your opinion about this or this? Notice how do we just promote this whole line of activity as human beings in communication to promote the belief or disbelief in things. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not here to say that we shouldn't do this, that, or be part of this or part of that, or join this or join that, or and so on. What I am saying is, as you're living your life, as you're doing whatever you're doing, it would probably be a good idea to take this food processor mind that is constantly stirring and going this way and going that way and chopping things up, and unplug it for a little while. Again, just a metaphor. I'm just saying, I'm not asking you to become a Buddhist or to join this or join that, or reject this or reject that. I'm saying take some time out, sit down, hold still. All of the senses are open, and watch what continues to buzz, what continues to move. Just the watching of that actually helps us, helps any of us to see more closely the way in which we confuse ourselves, the way in which we actually add to the confusion. It's just like you're on a tilt-a-whirl to start with, and you actually stick your leg out and start pushing faster. And so this is quite often the way that I talk about meditation, based on doing this for a long time and doing lots of different forms of it. Some forms are very, very extensively. So it's not like I read a book about it and I'm telling you what I read. What I am saying is read books, study, listen to what people are saying, especially if you're studying meditation. Study the traditional text, study the Lankavatara Sutra, the Samdhina Machana Sutra, the Lotus Sutra, the Heart Sutra, and Sutra. They're all over. Study that basic material and see if in fact you're magnetized by this way of studying. But the most important thing, as far as I can see, the most important thing we can do is sit down and look at the chemtrails of the mind. Look at what is it in the mind that keeps covering things up, whether it's along the lines of using that metaphor as a conspiracy theory, or go the other way as if that was something that was actually true. Maybe, perhaps that's true. If that were true, is there some kind of cover-up going on in our mind? Is there something arising? We're covering something up? I've noticed that in my own situation. Just a quick example. I had a an accountant or a bookkeeper one time that I liked him a lot, and he was, but he was, at the same time I liked him a lot. He was also stealing from me, and but I didn't want to see that, so I kind of knew it somewhere, but I didn't want to see that. I didn't want that to be the truth, so I just didn't investigate it until it became so obvious I couldn't see any other way that I was losing money. And I was, and again, not to go into the whole story, but I was driving back from Minnesota one day. I was driving right through Madison. I remember what happened, and just, it's like, you know, as they say, the hair stands up on the back of your neck. And I thought, it was a thought in my mind, he's stealing from me. And so I went back and talked to my attorney, and my attorney said, go look at your check records and so on. I did, and I found all kinds of checks written to some other fictitious company. But the part about it that I wanted to say is that I didn't fully know that I was hiding out from that truth. So it's like a chemtrail. It's like some kind of a blanket we put over something that if we know about, that's going to be too difficult, too painful. So meditation sometimes is called voluntary discomfort. So it means that you're coming in, you're not going out for a walk in the park, or you're not going out to relax and enjoy yourself, and you're actually coming in and sitting down facing a wall in this situation, holding still, and you're watching whatever's happening in the mind, whether it's a disturbance. It could be something, sometimes when we sit, it's a fairly pleasant situation. One of the things that if you sit enough, that you'll notice that there's something quite luxurious about coming in out of your everyday life and sitting down, holding still, that you don't have to do anything. You don't have to even think. You don't have to do anything. You're just sitting here. You're wide awake. You're looking at the wall, and everything is just settling, like very still water or air. So it'll be interesting to see if people go on about chemtrails onto YouTube and punch in chemtrails, and they'll get a talk on meditation instead of chemtrails. Or not. They'll see that and they say, that guy doesn't look, I don't believe that guy. Have you listened to him? Well, no, but look how he looks. I mean, he doesn't look very smart. There's no antennas coming out the top of his head. So I can talk a little further, but if you have questions, please, I'd like to do this mutually. Yes, Michael.
Are emotions chemtrails?
They can function that way if you to use as if chemtrails were, there's some truth to it. They can function that way if you do anything with them. If you push on them, they turn into a barrier. If you pull on them, they turn into an obstruction. And if you look away from them, they do something similar to that. So don't do anything with them. I'm not here to promote some kind of theory of the mind or what's happening. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a scholar. I'm a meditator. And so the way I talk about meditation somewhat comes out of the books and the studies and so on, but quite a bit of it is from sitting on a cushion for long periods of time and studying in that way. So yes and no.
You said that we cover stuff up because it's too painful to look at.
Yes.
How is seeing that pain relieving?
Well, if it's the truth, there's something about knowing that it's just true. There's no, that particular construct or that relative situation that's happening is just the truth. So that part of it is, I guess you could say, is satisfying. Even though it's painful, it's true. More?
Why do people use drugs to cover those thoughts, those emotions up?
It looks to me like there's using some drugs, whatever the chemicals are, goes in and actually stimulates pleasure situations so that we feel better temporarily. And then, of course, there's all the other things that we have to deal with that are so hard to see, that are under the so-called radar, that have to do with the chemical structure. Just like we don't know, we think the only way we know our food is being digested is it doesn't stay in our body. We know that it comes through, and I'm not going to go into that because we're not in the white Tara room, and that's the only place we can talk about poop during lunch, whatever. But so there's some kind of a process that's going on there that somehow we kind of opt for because we start to feel uncomfortable or whatever. We may. There's a lot of people that use all kinds of chemicals that doesn't seem to get a hold of them. It seems to be very much contingent upon your own particular biology, your own dynamics. Some people cannot drink at all. They just can't because their life just goes to pieces. And other people can drink some. So I'm just using that as an example. But same thing with other. I mean, I know people that actually keep from feeling bad by smoking a lot of weed. I'm not sure if there's some kind of if that's a chemtrail or not. I don't know, but I would say, well, trust yourself. But it's pretty hard to trust yourself if you have not really examined deeply and to see what this situation actually is by way of identity. Yes, sir.
When we were working with something that's very painful, the idea of working with it sometimes creates the mentality that's going to go away or be resolved. And when we work with something painful in meditation, what are we working towards, or what is the intention?
Ultimately, you're working towards not caring whether it's there or not. Initially, you're working with trying to get enough space so you cannot be miserable. But ultimately, you're working towards no self, no other. You're working towards ultimate transcendence of the relative situation that we seem to be locked down on. This is why there are wars, because it looks like somebody's right and somebody's wrong, and this is a misunderstanding of what this situation is. So ultimately, your concern is not about getting rid of suffering, even though the Buddha talked about it early on in the provisional teachings. Yes.
It seems like we can't just jump to that stage of not having the preference of it being there or not. So how does that initial relationship to that suffering look? Painful. And how do we relate to it from practice?
So drop below, if you can. This is another metaphor, and I'm very visual, so that's the way I tend to talk. But drop below the conceptual area that maybe give you a perfect description of what's going on. Drop down into the texture that the concepts are describing, and that starts to put you more in touch with the actual quality of the emotion, the texture, the feeling of it. It's not a description of a mud puddle. It is the mud puddle. You're actually going down into what the concepts. Sometimes if we get too conceptual, it helps us gives us some kind of a shield against the actuality of wet, mud, cold, all of those things. Yes.
Is it important to try to stay with the feelings themselves as opposed to the stories around the feelings?
Don't stay with anything. Don't stay. When I say don't stay with anything, don't even stay with that. Forget everything I said. Because the ultimate thing is you have to do it. 3 hours from now, 3 days, 3 years from now, 100 years from now. You're just going to have yourself to work with. And you may listen to others and you may listen to me. You may remember what I say, you may not. But you actually need to transcend. If you're listening to me, then it probably will resonate a little bit. You need to do that transcendence yourself. So trying to stay with something based on somebody else's instructions is confusion. And there are a lot of teachers that teach this way, and I'm not arguing with anyone, so don't misunderstand. I'm not saying anyone's wrong. The people they're working with, that's a totally perfect situation. People I'm working with, I'm coming from how I see this. And if no one resonates with what I'm saying, then this room would be empty, and I'd go home and take a nap. Yes, Ed.
Does ignoring a thought mean you're not willing to observe it?
Maybe. It's pretty hard to ignore. If we could ignore thoughts, we wouldn't need any drugs at all.
Well, in my mind, I let it go, which is like ignoring it. Okay.
Letting it go is a concept that may work or may not. That's a very letting something go is like getting rid of it. It's like wanting to manipulate it or do something with it. And it's pretty hard to manipulate something you don't understand. Go ahead.
Well, I'm hung up on that for some reason.
Well, sit a lot.
Huh?
Sit a lot.
Yeah.
Sit a lot.
Is awareness a protocol?
Well, you could use it that way. Awareness is like all of the words that deal with that kind of nebulous area of awareness, consciousness. It's so if you look at the parts, it's so complicated. We have awareness that's functioning in our digestive tract and our kidneys and all through our body that is regulating our temperature, our blood sugar levels, our heart rate. There's so many things that are going on that way that are on default. They just function because of the way this has come into being. And our consciousness, we have a little say-so, but as I've said probably 100 times, if I've said it once, is you don't want to be put in charge of your body because you will be dead shortly. If you have to make a decision about everything, blood pressure, temperature, you'll forget something and you'll die. Just a way of saying, of trying to say, so complicated. There's something that's functioning that I call consciousness, and then that area of the consciousness that kind of comes together as looking at something, seeing, or looking at the computer, looking at my face, or listening, has a quality of separation to it that is necessary for there to be such a thing as awareness. As actually kind of a focused consciousness on a particular thing. But anytime you focus on one thing, you ignore everything else. More.
I guess I'm wondering, when you say not to believe or disbelieve anything you say, don't stay with anything you say. So
I do.
You often talk about awareness being king or queen.
Yes, I do.
And
it's a provisional teaching. I mean, it's like empower that part of your life so that there's some kind of power there, some kind of this is what I'm going to do. I mean, don't have a conversation about yourself whether I should sit or not. This is what I do. So you need to empower that. On the other hand, the ultimate situation, there's nobody in charge. There is no authority. We just need to work with authority until we see that there is no authority. If there's authority, then there's still separation. The ultimate transcendence is to completely leave this world and not move an inch. There's no other way to say it. Well, there probably is, but I'm not smart enough. Yes.
How do we bring awareness to the perception of our thoughts and our emotions?
Practice. The practice of sitting meditation is to fail. It's one disappointment after another, as Trungpa Rinpoche once said. It's the failure. We have a presumption about what thoughts are. We don't really know what they are. So when we start to work with them as if they're based on our preconceptions of them, we begin to see that they're not exactly little bundles of energy with a tail and a head that come into our mind and squeak a few times and run out. There's something else happening there that is also revealing the lack of separation between anything. The ultimate nature of things is not separate. Yes.
How do we always stay with that?
Don't stay with it. Don't leave it. Don't stay with it. Don't do anything with it. But you're in the room. You put one foot in front of the other until you got in this room and sat down. And you come here and you meditate and you practice. Just continue to do that. And beyond that, don't guess at anything. Either know it or don't know it. But I kind of believe this, but I'm not sure about that. That's circular. You might as well be leaving the meditation hall and getting on a tilt-a-whirl or a merry-go-round. No, that one's the one that goes this way. That's the Ferris wheel. Yeah, very similar.
You described awareness as a focused consciousness.
Just a way of talking about it.
In that same vein, if the nature of awareness is exclusion, how can we use it to include?
You have to see the separation in order to see that it's not separate. So you have to start with but the relative truth has to be, you have to really see the relative truth in order to see there is no separation. So you have to go into the relativity. You have to see the walls of the mind before the walls can become transparent or vanish. If you don't see them, then you'll live your life in a corner of the room. And there's nothing wrong with this. This may be your incarnation to do that. You may have 15 more. This may be the time when the top of your head will blow off. Just kidding.
So, is there no perfection? Is there just practice?
Well, the word perfection is a relative, perfect, imperfect. So we use the idea of perfection so people can back off on the constant wanting to control everything and polish everything. Let's just see what it is, and so far as we can, let's leave the hammers and the chisels and the pliers in the other room and all the menus and everything, just for the time you come in and sit down. Just this, over and over again, like it says in the manner as it is. We know.
Question from Sheldon down in Union City. He asks, you mentioned the luxury of meditation in not having to think or do anything, which I have experienced. It's not really motivating me to continue now. Does it wear out? Is it just my style of ignorance that does that?
Probably to the first one, and probably to the second one. Both with capital P's. Probably. Sit a lot. It's very difficult to work with this if there isn't some way of actually seeing it. And it seems that if your body is in motion at all, in most cases, there's a few exceptions to that, but if your body is in motion, it tends to drain the awareness away from the parts of the thought process and so on. That might be a good idea to take a look at. That's why people go jogging. When I say why, I don't know why. Probably 15 other reasons I'm totally missing. I have no idea. But to go out and jog, if your body's moving, it tends to take some of that awareness energy away from the mind. Just a way of talking about it. I don't know what's really happening. And as I said, I'm not a scientist, so I have no proof for anything. And if I did, I would probably be lying. Yes.
Isn't everything perfect?
From the point of view of ultimate realization, yes, everything. There isn't anything to correct because nothing is separate. It's not because this is perfect and that's imperfect, and this is everything, and this is some other stuff that's not important. That's why it's not perfect. It's in the Dzogchen tradition. If you read Longchenpa, whom we've studied here, that particular approach, it's an approach to confusion that says that everything is perfect. There's nothing to correct. And I think this is some people are ready to hear this and need that kind of uplift or some kind of releasing some of the tension by saying there's nothing you don't have to keep trying to fix yourself. It's so circular. It's so, and if you listen to anyone else, even me, don't even listen to me, but find out who you are. Even if I never see you again, there's no mistakes. Find out who you are before this particular body, speech, mind, blood, oxygen machine passes away. Because when that passes away, you're not going anywhere. Yes.
What is perfect in relation to appropriate?
Well, perfect is a concept that is, in this context, being used to pull some of the energy away from that search for right opposes wrong, and appropriate would be working with the relative situation in such a way that you would have some panoramic awareness or vision around it, because you've not being so self-centered anymore. Everything isn't about you. You actually are aware of everything else that's happening. Something else, a very tiny person on the other side of the room walks around. You don't necessarily focus on it, but you don't miss it. So you're including. So this way, you know that you can't swear. Appropriate. This is an example of it, but it's if that I swear occasionally, but I wouldn't do it now. Yes.
What would panoramic awareness not be aware of?
Itself. There's only one thing happening, and even that is suspect. If you have to say one, then it's the beginning of a lie. Yes.
Is there a self?
The self is a concept. So it's a concept we use to function in this apparent relative, up and down, back and forth, night and day, life and death. So we use that. But I don't know. Find out. And let me know. Come and report. I have no idea if there is or not. Being that something's happening, but it's profound, it's vast, and it's from our grain of sand in the middle of the Mojave or desert, which our consciousness seems to appear like that. If you look at it long enough, you'll see that you're not much. You're quite a bit. You're not separate, just in the way in which you're quite a bit, but you're not much in this little tiny dot in the middle of nowhere. We're lucky we have a big ball of dirt to sit on. What luck is that?
Very lucky to be sitting.
Yes, we're lucky to be sitting. Further questions? We got a couple of minutes before the daily Dharma gathering. David?
Does delusion constantly move?
What do you mean by delusion?
The kind you're talking about with chemtrails, we're trying to stop something or still something.
Yeah, probably. The way you seem to, the way you're asking it, probably. Do you experience it that way?
Most of the time.
Okay. Well, then I was right. Any question?
I forgot it.
You forgot it? Mm-hmm. We have a lot in common. Forget a lot of stuff. So yes, goes on.
You were telling a story about your accountant.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like you said you really liked the guy.
I did.
It seems like as you were going along, maybe you had a gut feeling about it, but it was, you liked him, so it was easier.
I did. I actually remember a situation where I couldn't go there because I liked him.
So you couldn't go there, so there was some awareness of that. But when something comes up and it's like a gut feeling and you don't know what it is, and you realize it's easier not to look, how can you look?
Sit a lot. Would be I don't know of anything else. There might be other things that are happening that you would be tuned into more than I would be, of course. But I think sitting down, doing a lot of sitting meditation, and sitting meditation isn't anything. We're not talking about some kind of religious thing necessarily or spiritual thing at all. We're just saying, sit down, hold still, and watch your mind. Just watch, see what your mind actually does or is. See what it actually is, rather than do some technique to get you to be this way or be that way. And I'm not discounting those either. Some people really would do well to do hundreds of thousands of mantras, and other people not. But you need to be the one that, because of your dynamic, that goes towards that or is drawn towards that kind of practice. You want to do that? I'll help you. But what I recommend to start with, let's just sit down and see what this is. And then if you need to do some other kind of process, some other way of working with things.
Shoto saying at one point, by watching the mind, we don't know what it is, but we can see what it does. What's the difference between is and does?
Well, we can see that some part of the mind is shutting down, or in the mind there's a quality of heat, or a quality, very simply, there's something that is fading out, or I could use lots of words like watching a stage play. There's all kinds of activity. We really don't know what it is. If we do anything with it, we come up with words like it's an illusion, or it's unreal, or it's dependently arisen. There's so many ways as far as what it is, because it's not separate, and we're looking at it with receiving it, observing it from an apparent separation called a self, or an ego, or the seventh consciousness, as it's described in the Yogacara tradition of the 8 consciousnesses.
What is it to know what something is?
It's to not know what it is.
What's showing up as doing something?
In that respect, nothing is doing. You're not doing anything at all. It's not separate. So when it is not separate, then there could be all kinds of relative things. But the ultimate situation, which is where the consciousness eventually settles into, is there's nothing really separate. So one is already, you could say, not to paint a negative picture, but it's like whatever is opposite of anything you look at, the opposite, they're the same, or they're not separate, like Sandokai, the equality of sameness and difference. What looks like two different things is the same. What looks like the same is two different things. So it's just like the one that's so obvious, the one we're ignoring the most is life and death. We're alive, but there's no separation between them. They're separated, but the fundamental nature is you can't have one without the other. You can't have life without this kind of situation of being a consciousness entering into an organism and assuming that it is the organism.
Is there a practice to include death?
Yes.
What is that?
Well, let's start here. Start with this, and we can talk about that later. There are some practices, Machiklab in ancient Tibet, a practice called chud. I don't know, am I pronouncing that right, Mason? Close enough. Close enough. Mason speaks Tibetan and is a scholar, so. But where they actually practice in a charnel ground or graveyard to actually face that kind of situation with consciousness, to go in and sit in the middle. And imagine if you were to just say, I'm going to go out to the cemetery and sit there all night, with gravestones and do a practice. It was that kind of a thing. So there are practices that are very deliberately go into it. Then there are ones that do it a little bit more conceptually. Then there are ones that would do it just sitting down and watching your thoughts die. Thoughts arise and they die. They're born, it seems, and then it seems they live a little bit, and then it seems that they die. Yes, sir.
Is death ultimate truth?
There can only be death if there's birth. So first find out if you were born. Find out who you are. Find out what was born. You get to know. Look at the assumption we assume just because we brush our teeth. Must be something here. Why would I don't need to brush my teeth because I'm unborn. I mean, we get silly about it, but it's the understanding is so deep and so profound that you're tongue-tied. If you begin to see it, you're tongue-tied. You don't know how to say what you're understanding, and you realize that every time you open your mouth, you're lying because you can't actually say. Ultimate truth cannot be said. That's why it's ultimate, and even the word ultimate is kind of a sham. You need something to point to it. Yes. Time? Okay, we're going to do daily Dharma gathering. Okay, thank you. So we'll be back in 10 minutes.
But first we'll stand and dedicate the merit in the back of your blue chant books. And I would like to remind everybody about the donation boxes that we have in the hallway for the teacher and for Sokukoji. We greatly appreciate all the financial help you can give us.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. The three worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.